Welcome back, Honors. We're going to finish up today talking about the indigenous people of South America. We've already gone up to the natives of North America in considering what we call Native Americans and what we call the Plains natives and things like that. So we've also got up to the Olmecs, the Mayans, and the Aztecs, right? So now we're going to move on to the Mochi, Chavin, the Nazca, and the Inca. We're going to talk about the first three all together because they made their height still in the BC era and weren't really considered like a I guess they never came into contact with the Spaniards, whereas the Inca did. So we'll focus on them much more heavily. But let's go ahead and get started. So of course we're entering into South America, right? Well, early people in South America are with the Chavin, the Mochi, and the Nazca. And some of y'all are asking yourselves, like, wait a minute, this is a whole continent. North America had hundreds, probably thousands of tribes up there. Why is there only three in South America? Well, geographically speaking, there is a huge, huge, huge rainforest that exists in South America. And if you don't know what it's called, we got problems. But it's the Amazon. And the Amazon kind of kept several different tribes and cultures of people hidden for hundreds, even thousands of years. There are still people there living the traditional lifestyle of their ancient people in the Amazon right now. But the Chavin, the Mochi, and the Nazca were the very first early complex civilization, non-nomadic tribes, and they were all based in Peru. A lot of us believe, or a lot of historians believe, that Peru was a very good cradle for civilization due to the wind environment, the plantable soil, and then also the the amounts of actually silt that were carried down from the mountains. So, yay, silt. Anyway, so one big thing that stood out about these three early civilizations, though, is their architecture, how they constructed their homes, and they actually built their homes out of Adobe. And some of you are asking yourself, well, what is Adobe? Anybody want to take a stab at it? Good job, Coffee. About time you talked. Adobe is a mixture of mud and clay. It's like a very rudimentary cement, all right? Now, the way you use Adobe is that you actually make Adobe bricks and you stack those up like you would any other normal brick, but then you take large amounts of Adobe and then you paste it along the outsides of the wall to make a very sturdy structure. It's not like they invented Adobe. Of course, they didn't. Adobe's been used by the indigenous people of Mali under Mansa Musa. It's been used in Iran. It's been used all over the place. But this is a really, really big thing because it shows that they were on their way to creating developed and very intense and very multi-bureaucratic organized governmental societies just like everyone else did. Maybe they just didn't get enough time. Anybody ever ask themselves, well, what if the Spanish never showed up, right? If they never got there, maybe they would have came into contact with the Europeans later on, and maybe they would have traded and been more civil, but I guess we'll never know, right? So this is, of course, what an Adobe home looks like. Now, these are the Adobe homes that exist in Mexico today. They have several stories. They use ladders instead of stairs. This is, of course, not... It's very hard for us to find Nazca, Mochi, or Chavin Adobe homes anymore because they were destroyed. So, anyway, the big evidence, though, left behind by the Nazca people were the geoglyphs that they made. Now, some of you are saying, what's a geoglyph? Well, what do you think a geoglyph is? Let's break it down, right? We talked about what was the advancement of language. We talked about that. Remember, it went through three stages. Anybody got it? Anybody? Good job, John Marino. It went pictograms, ideograms, phonetics, right? Well, inside of a pictogram were what the Egyptians used as their writing. What was that called? Good job, O'Donnell. Hieroglyphics, right? So a glyph is, of course, a way of picture writing. But geo means what? Good job, earth, right? So this is a earth picture. So let me show you what an earth picture looks like. Boom, like that, right? A geoglyph is what we believe that the Nazcas used to communicate with their gods. These gigantic pictures expertly drawn in the dirt using mounds, right? So the insane part about it is that this thing right here is over 150 feet long, and it's over it's very, very large. You can see it. It's very, very big. Anyway, so the better question is, though, is how did they create these without being able to see them, right? These are gigantic, gigantic pieces of, I guess I would call them artwork, right? But How did they get it so symmetrical without being able to see over top of it? What we believe is what they were messaging their gods is thanks. They have the monkey right here, but they made a lot of different ones. They had a condor, a hummingbird, a monkey, the spider, a heron, hands, a set of hands. So it's a lot of very, very cool stuff. So now we're moving on to the big guys, though, the ones that Pizarro came into contact with, which we'll talk about him tomorrow, okay? The Incas. Most of you pull your influence of Incas from where? Emperor's New Groove, right? Well, there is one part of very validital, Maria? Yeah. What word am I looking for? Valid? Huh? Valid information. If I'm talking about like a movie, it has valid information, right? Relevant information. Thank you, sweetheart. There's relevant information that exists in the Emperor's New Groove. What's the main character's name in the Emperor's New Groove? Maria? Good job, sweetheart. Cusco, right? So Cusco is actually the name of the Incan capital city, right? Very, very large capital city. Excuse me. But their holy city was called Machu Picchu. I'll show you a picture of Machu Picchu just because I think it's the much cooler of the two, and there's not a lot of Cusco left. So, anyway, but let's keep going. Pull the lever, Kronk. The Incans rose to its height around 1400 AD. So they're a very, very large empire, very late in the game, right? They were set in the Andes Mountains. Now, some of us are wondering already, wait a minute, you had a large civilization on top of the mountains? They did. So they did not trade also. They kept themselves safe from other civilizations like the Aztecs and the Mayans because they refused to trade with anybody else. Who does this sound like? Anybody? Anybody? Who does it sound like? Come on. I know you know. Wait, right there. O'Toole. Who does it sound like? Good job. The Spartans, they refused to trade with anyone because they believed that coming into contact with other civilizations may lead to war, war's bad, and several other problems, considering dissension, civil wars, etc., things like that. So, but the king organized efforts to feed the people, so they came up with these amazing farming techniques, which I'll show you in a minute. So this right here is what's left of Machu Picchu. I desperately want to see it one day. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous relic. It's their holy city, built high atop a mountain. Who else does this sound like that's Greek? Good job, y'all. The Acropolis, that was built by almost every Greek city-state, right? Keep your relics high, because then you can communicate with who? Your gods. Good job. So, the government also, the organized Incan government, built over 14,000 miles of roads through the mountains that connected the cities, the small cities, to the empire. This is pretty intense, right? This is like rivals that of the Aztecs and rivals that of the early Romans. And yet, when we close our eyes and think Incans, we think face paint, human sacrifice, blah, 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 feathered headdress. It's not necessarily true, right? So, but I do think llamas are pretty cool. Alpacas are not nice, though. Anyway, they farmed on terraces of steeped land. Now, terraces are notches cut into the mountains to make fields for farming. I want you to imagine a mountain with just steps on it, okay? Steps, right? That have just been cut and carved into the mountain, okay? So, this is what it looks like. They would actually cut into the mountain to create flat lands for farming. How cool is that, right? They would even build small houses. They'd, farm their alpacas and whatnot. So do all that kind of cool stuff. They also mastered the arts of weaving. More importantly, though, they mastered the arts of making alloys. They were one of the first civilizations to ever make alloys, right? What is an alloy, you ask? Well, first of all, actually, let's roll back a little bit. Some of you are saying, well, yeah, English and them were making alloys a long time before everybody else. They actually weren't, all right? So they were still using iron for like the longest time. Turns out, though, that the first alloys ever really made by the Europeans wasn't until 1500 AD when they started mixing nickel and copper into their iron to make different types of alloys to give them more strength and a sharper edge. And the first real alloy makers in Europe were the Germans when they made steel. But anyway, that's beside the point. So they mastered the arts of weaving and making alloys. An alloy is a mixture or a blend of different metals to create a stronger and sharper tool. Well, you got to admit, they would have to have an alloy just to be able to cut into these mountains like they did, right? So the one thing that I've never bothered to look up is what type of farm equipment could they have possibly wielded to be able to cut those giant steps in? I don't know. Well, maybe we'll look it up. So, or maybe you should look it up. Now, we're the first people also to perform successful surgeries on the head and to use anesthetics, right? I mean, like these people were very, very advanced. I personally find them out of the big three civilizations, Aztecs, Mayans, Incas, I think the Incans are the best. Anesthetics are chemicals that render the human body unconscious and unresponsive to pain. For extra credit, if you look up what the Incan anesthetics were made out of, I'll give you a 100 quiz grade, all right? So, anyway, got to come tell me first, though. Now, let's talk about commonalities between all of the ancient civilizations. They had one male ruler. Nobles were military leaders that handled government business. The majority of the civilized were farmers. They were polytheistic, and they also all believed in human sacrifice. The Incans actually did it kind of very differently from the Aztecs and the Mayans. The Aztecs and the Mayans actually would whip out hearts and stuff. I'll show you a picture in a second. But the Incans actually they would sacrifice typically women, younger women, those of the pure nature, if you understand what I'm saying, and they would also they would bury them in the Andes, and they would create these mummies out of them. I'll show you a picture of the one tomorrow. The most famous one, she's very well preserved. And they also all had games, particularly the two of them, Aztecs and the Mayans, both played a game very similar to each other called poke to poke. And now it's like kind of the precursor to basketball. We'll watch a video if I can find a good one. There's a lot of cheesy videos on YouTube about it, but I want to find a really solid one. So I'll show you that tomorrow as well. So bam, right? This actually is an artist rendering of Aztec sacrifice. Up here is the ultimate god, Quetzalcoatl, to the Aztecs, and he's the god of destruction. And these are the priest and the nobles on the outside, and they're sacrificing someone. It was considered a great honor to be sacrificed to Quetzalcoatl, but this was to keep him from destroying everything. So even some of the Aztecs believed when the Spaniards showed up that they were sent by Quetzalcoatl. So right here, you can see the knife behind his hand, and he's actually cutting open his chest and pulling the heart out, right? So apparently, according to some historians, they say that the Aztec sacrifice wasn't considered successful unless the heart was still beating, right? And they would stick it in a jar, and they would line them all up. Now, here's the other extra credit opportunity. If you can look up how many, on the average year, how many people did the Aztecs sacrifice, I'll give you a free 100 quiz grade. First, come and tell me, okay? So, fantastic job, y'all. We'll talk more about this tomorrow. I love these people. I think that there's such intense groups of societies that were just eradicated the second that the Spanish settlers showed up. So we'll continue to talk about them though tomorrow, and we'll get into how the line of demarcation affected the Portuguese and the Spanish and how their conquest differed, and also how the Portuguese didn't last very long because the Dutch showed up in their little wooden clogs and windmills and kind of booted them out of Africa. So, but we'll get there. So I look forward to seeing y'all soon. See you in the morning.